Hi everyone, you're welcome to the final session of our mental health talk series held in memory of our brother Godfred. This afternoon we have with us a special guest from one of Africa's largest teaching hospitals. We have with us Masha Boy Bashiru from Kolebu Teaching Hospital. She's taking time off from her busy work schedule to be with us, so we really appreciate the effort. And Masha would be here to give us professional insights on what we need to know to help each other out in this community that we're in as far as mental health is concerned. So she's going to take it up from here. And Masha, thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I always say anything that has to do mental health counts me in. So it's a pleasure, and I apologize for my flu, but here I am. So and Nanaya just reached out recently, and he spoke about one of the topics that is really at heart to me. And I think this is also a conversation that a lot of us need to have as much as we can. And this is the issue of mental health. And a lot of us begin to think when it's mental health, it is what we see on the street. So when someone says mental health, your mind automatically goes to people dressed in a very, dirty clothes, walking in a way on the streets. However, mental health is not that. Mental health, when you follow the World Health Organization definition, it simply means that mental health is how healthy your mind is. Are you able to cope with stress on a daily activities, on a daily life? Are you able to form relationships well? Are you able to be on top of your game when it comes to decision making? Are you able to balance work life? Are you able to balance school and life? So mental health in this context is not just about absence of illness or not being sick, but then also how healthy are you able to balance your life? So the opposite of mental health would be what we call mental illness. And this is what we normally would see when there's a disbalance in how you function on daily activities. So you're not able to cope with stress, you're not able to do certain activities, you have lack of sleep, you're not able to maintain hygiene. And so it comes on a spectrum. So mental illness doesn't just start from very high, it starts on a very low level and then it progresses to come to the severe stages. So I think in brief, this is what mental health is. And mental health, you can look at it as mental health is your wellness of your brain, and mental illness is when something is not happening the way it should. And most of the mental health conditions would usually appear by the age of 14. That is half of them. And the other one third or two thirds of it would have appeared by the time the brain is fully developed. That is at the age of 25. So what does this mean to us, the young people? It simply means that everyone could be at risk. And when we look at the Ghanaian statistics on the Ghanaian map, about 1 out of 5 people would have had some sort of a mental health struggle in some point in their daily life. So why do we need to talk about it? So the stress here is understanding that mental health can happen to anyone and everyone. However, mental illness can have an effect on some people without having an effect on others. But then all of us would have experienced some sort of mental illness at some point in time because, as I mentioned, they are on a spectrum. So starting from the lowest and goes to extreme severe cases. When I think of mental illness, and as I mentioned, a lot of people don't seem to understand what mental health and mental illness is. So when we talk about mental illness, we automatically think we are mad or we are not doing well or something is wrong with us. But then, as I mentioned, it's how you function in a day. So you might have a personality that is looking at perfection. You might be looking at trying to be on top of your game. You have been overachiever for the past, younger ages. And then when you finally got into the working world, you seem not to be able to perform. And then you begin to doubt yourself, you begin to have questions. So self-esteem can also be considered as that. So mental illness does not necessarily mean that you are weak. There's also another misconception about mental health is that prayer. So prayer is good. Having faith is good. And as Africans, when we talk about mental health and psychology specifically, you can't take religion out of it. So everything we do will surround somehow around religion. So we can't forget the fact that religion plays a good role in someone's mental well-being. However, religion alone cannot support. It's powerful, but then there's also a need to have some sort of a professional support. Also, another misconception that I think is a bigger problem in our society is that we begin to believe that children cannot have mental health conditions. And as I mentioned earlier with the statistics, you can imagine at least half of them would have come out by the age of 14. There are some specific mental health conditions that are very prominent in the early childhood stages. So trauma is one. So right from birth, the body can register trauma. You can also look at it as anxiety. So separation anxiety is one of the very first anxiety things you would see in children. So, for example, having toddlers, taking them to school, and you have to take them and hand them over to the teacher. So this could be seen as one of the separation anxiety. So this is one of the very earliest mental health conditions you can see in children. So yes, it's not only adults who may struggle with mental health conditions. So understanding that would be able to help us know the kind of help we can give to other people. Also, with the younger generation now, there's always a need to try to fit in. So the misconception is that you should be able to be of a certain stage or of a certain class. So that desire to be there, and when you are not and things are falling apart, you may think that this doesn't satisfy the criteria for what mental health or mental illness is. Sorry, Nana, am I audible? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're
Yes,
very
so
audible.
yeah, right, wonderful. So I was just getting a bit of feedback. So I think just in the nutshell, what we are trying to understand is that we want to lay a very good foundation and understanding what mental health is and what mental illness is. So mental health is how you function, how you behave, what you do on daily basis, your relationship, your well-being. And then mental illness is when things are not being able to be balanced. And the major misconception is that people think mental health is when you are mad, walking on the street, talking to yourself. But then there are other things that comes to mind when you think of mental illness. And I mentioned the fact that children can also struggle from mental health illness. It starts right from birth. For some, it's very visible in the early childhood. And then there are certain mental health conditions that begin to become more pronounced in the early 20s. And these are more towards the psychiatry field. So how do these mental health conditions come about? There's a lot of interplay of various factors. One of them could be biological. So some people have it in their families. So there's a family history of having a mental health condition, being it depression, being it anxiety. We have over 300 mental health conditions. So, but the most common ones in Ghana is anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, which we normally call PTSD. And we do have some sort of specialties under traumas because we have childhood traumas, we have sexual traumas, and also victims of domestic violence would also sometimes fall within the post-traumatic stress disorder classification. So these are usually the most common mental health illness. And then those who have a bit of a psychiatric condition would be the bipolar condition. We also have a schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorders, and then some personality disorders. So these are usually the most common ones that you would see in Ghana, and these are the ones that would usually see at the clinics. So when I talk about the biological causes, this will be something is going on behind in the anatomy of the brain, or there could be some fluctuations of some hormones, and so this is also could be hereditary. So it may be passed on from a parent to a child or from a distant relative back into the family. So that is biological interplay. In the most common one, we will look at it looking at the age group. So I'm looking at the younger group, which is maybe a high school, and then you have young adults who are in the universities, and then also maybe get into more of like a middle adulthood to all the adults. So this would be the working class people. So the common triggers or the common risk factors would be the expectations. So for the younger group, you can have your academic pressures. So senior high students have a target to achieve. They have to perform. So those who are writing the WASI, they need to be able to get certain grades. Those who are going to the universities have to perform within a certain grade. So there's a lot of competition, and there's also a lot of pressure on the youth to excel because the competition is very tight of late. Then we also look at the social risk factors. So the social risk factors is, I look at it in the society, how people function in a place. So some of the risk factors I see a lot within the younger group of people is bullying. So bullying has different forms. Most common ones that we find in the younger group is physical and verbal bullying. So this is what usually happens in secondary schools, and you would hear people say, "Our time we passed through this, so the younger ones also have to pass through this." However, all sorts of bullying, so physical bullying, social bullying, and now we have cyberbullying. All sorts of bullying is not okay. It definitely has a lifelong effect on the mental health of anyone who has gone through any sort of bullying. And so this is like the societal risk factors for someone to develop or to have some mental health conditions in their lifetime. Also, I'm looking at it as family dynamics. Sometimes people come from homes who don't have a very loving environment, who are constantly in conflict, verbal abuse going on, physical abuse going on. So constantly being exposed to such an environment would definitely predispose one to have some mental health conditions or feelings about what has happened so far. Another thing I could think about off my head would be uh, maybe the kind of experiences someone has. So this may also come under your social expectations or responsibilities. So some people may have gone through so bullying, and then you might have also been exposed to some sort of trauma as growing up or in the university. So I think how this whole meeting came about was as a result of something that happened, and this was a very sad event that happened. And I also, please correct me if I'm right. Yeah, I think it happened during the week, class, or this week,
It was over the weekend,
or over the
Saturday.
week. Yeah, Saturday. So, being exposed to even hearing such news can have someone have feelings about the event, and that can also cause some sort of a mental health disturbance to the person. So, as I mentioned, they are all on the levels. So, it could be a minor disturbance, and it develops into having a full-time mental health condition that satisfies the diagnosis, clinical diagnosis of having a mental health condition. Yes. So. Just to wrap up on what some of those mental health challenges is that everyone is at risk of having a mental health condition. The fact that we did not get it or we didn't have it or we don't have it does not necessarily protect us from getting it. So we need to have a lot of work to do in order to protect our mental health. And one of the things that comes to mind is understanding or knowing how will I be able to identify if I am prone to having a mental health condition or I do have a mental health condition. So I think because of the nature of our conversation, it's mostly going to be surrounded on the topic of suicide prevention, but then this may also be applicable to other mental health conditions. So suicide in by itself is not a mental health condition, but then it's a predisposition to some of the mental health conditions. And it's usually when you pick at least one person out of the four who have had some sort of suicidal thoughts, you would notice there was a history of mental health condition at the background. So what is the reality in Ghana like when it comes to suicide? Suicide up to now, even though has been decriminalized, is still a very suicidal, it's a very taboo-like topic in Ghana because we don't seem to understand how, especially young people might be having such thoughts. So you might have heard someone say, But your time, you have, cars, you have good classrooms, you have access to food. During our time, we had to work on food, we had to do a lot of work before we are even able to go to school. So why would you be feeling the way you are feeling? So that is lack of knowledge about what someone may be going through. And I think what I mentioned is that children can have mental health conditions. So if you're growing up in a family that does not believe or understand that a child can have a mental health problem, how can that person be of help to this child? So suicide, a lot of suicidal ideations or plans. So plans is usually when you have a clear plan of how you want your life to be taken, and then for those who have gone ahead and they don't come back, then that is a full suicide death. However, some people might have thought about it and not necessarily act on it. There will always be signs, even though most people might have said, "Oh, I know this person very well. This person was jovial. This person was all bubbly." So mental health doesn't always have to look gloomy. There are people who are very high functioning. So you notice they are able to do most of the things anyone who doesn't know have any mental health condition will be able to function, will be able to be productive, will be able to go on. But then there's something at the background lingering. So usually it is comes to the question of worthiness. So am I worthy to be alive? Am I worthy to be here? Am I even good enough to be able to even get the things I'm getting? So it's not only about having not being able to function the way you do, but then some people have doubts and lack of self how what, let me phrase it, lack of self-esteem to be able to function in those environments. So when they come into contact with an environment that requires people to have very strong personalities, being able to be overachievers, being able to they begin to dim in such environments and they can't function. So you notice that people who had a certain type of personalities will have a sudden change in personality. So someone was a very bubbly person, and all of a sudden the person usually would shy away from people, would isolate, would go out less often, or would have some conversations that do not have hope in it. Because I mentioned that when it comes to suicide, what people, the element in the suicide is worth. They are questioning their worth uh, on this planet. They are questioning their worth as humans. So there's always an element of hopelessness because they don't see beyond today. They don't see beyond tomorrow. They just live in the past. They are beginning to compare themselves. How were things before? The things are not like this, and means things are not going to get better. So usually there are very subtle warning signs, but it's not everybody who would exhibit because they are on a spectrum. So not everyone would exhibit those signs, but usually these are the very first warning signs you notice that the person begins to have conversations that don't have a lot of hope. They begin to question their worth. They also begin to have some conversations surrounding death and have some fascinations about dying, and you would notice a certain trend in them. That is, if you are very conversant or you are very, very free and familiar with the person. Some people will begin to also involve themselves in a very risky behavior. So you would notice that maybe this was a very conservative person, not really an outgoing person, then because the person begins to abuse substances or begin to have some sort of reckless behaviors. And these are things you would sometimes see among university students because there's a bit of freedom there, and there's also a lot of peer pressure happening in that environment. So some people were involved in a very risky behaviors until they finally try to execute the plan they have. Some people will make some statements in the passing, maybe saying, "What if I was dead? What will happen?" Some will also not exhibit any of those signs. However, the person may have been extremely excited, extremely bubbling, extremely involving in activities, and this was not usually how the person was behaving. So this will give you some sign that there's a change, not necessarily maybe towards the suicide or mental health issue, but then you can clearly see there's a shift in some sort of personality. Um, the next thing is how do you help without overstepping your boundaries, because you can't just walk to someone and ask, are you suicidal? Are you having thoughts about killing yourself? That will not really function or work. So best thing anyone can do for anyone is just to be a listening partner. Sometimes as humans, we have the desire to overhelp, we have the desire to always try to solve problems. And sometimes people don't need to solve any problems, because some of the problems cannot be solved within the 10 minutes or the 15 minutes that you are trying to be there for the person. You also don't want to appear as someone who just came to inquire what the problem was, and then you leave the person hanging midway conversation. So the first step for anyone to do when you want to be an accountability partner to someone is just to be a listening person, show some empathy, and then without judgment, then you can make statements that I was just worried about you. I'm checking in. Hope everything is well. If there's anything that you want to discuss, I'm always here. You can send me a message. You can send me a text message, a WhatsApp message, or you can ping me on any social media platform, or when you see me, just give me a wave, maybe a double wave, and then I will know that you need someone to help you out. And so sometimes people, that's reaching out to someone may save someone, but then always it's advisable that you encourage the person to seek professional help, because suicide ideations and thoughts and plans are an emergency, and therefore it has to be treated as such. So we don't have to try to solve anyone's problem. You need to be able to refer them to the professional if you do suspect that someone may be having any thoughts about suicide. And this is similar also to other mental health conditions. Sometimes you may not really know what someone is going through. So someone who might be having depressive episodes would not need the same help with someone who might be having anxiety-like symptoms. So it is very important you don't cross your boundaries to appear that you know more. Also, some judgment may feel insensitive. So, for example, someone will say, how can this make you feel like this? Do you know what I'm even going through? My own is even more than yours. So doing that, you minimize or invalidate how the person is feeling based because on what you are going through. But then everybody has a different coping mechanisms. Everybody has a different personality. Everybody has different breaking points in their life. So for that particular person, this may have been their breaking points. And for you, you might have had some resilience, you might have had access to support, you might have a different upbringing, which makes you more resilient to what the other person is going through. So we need to be very mindful of how we talk to people. We need to be very mindful about the kind of comments we make. And this also applies to people on social media. Sometimes people who are seeking some sort of help may post something on social media, and the next thing you see that people are chastising them in the comments and saying all sorts of things. So that could be a risk factor for someone. Just seeing those kind of unkind comments can predispose someone to taking their own life. So silence kills. So we need to always try to seek support in our small way. We try to be each other's keeper. So empathy goes along in any of the things you want to do in your life for anyone at all. If you don't have empathy, it's really hard to be able to help anyone. So empathy is one of the skills that we are being taught as psychologists. If you don't have that skill, you really can't be able to work regardless of the kind of knowledge you have acquired or the kind of school you went to. So empathy is one of the most of the principles in any sort of counseling you want to offer anyone at all. So understanding this areas about mental health and how insensitive that some of our comments may be to someone, um, um, sorry, I lost my thoughts of pattern, but that's fine. So we now need to know, how do we help people to cope when they are going through that? So first thing you need to understand is that everybody experiences mental health differently. Some people may be high functioning, some people may be low functioning. And the fact that somebody is performing well does not mean the person may not be able to have any mental health condition or have some suicidal thoughts. It does not work like that. The fact that you are able to cope with something, you cannot assume automatically that the other person should be able to cope or to be able to function the way you do. Sometimes religion comes into interplay, and then we begin to minimize some of the things that the person might be going through. I'm not sure how in the Muslim community it works. Maybe someone in the audience can share it, but sometimes in the Christian community, the clients I usually see, what they often say is that um, I am a Christian, so I don't see how, if I have faith in God, I should be struggling with depression and anxiety. But then it goes much deeper than just having faith. That you need to be able to understand that this goes beyond you. There are things in the environment that you can't control. So if you're not able to process that certain things goes beyond you, you may be blaming yourself and sometimes even doubting your own faith in what you are doing on this in this world. So, how do we cope with mental health, and also um, how do we help people to cope? I think that's the angle I would come from. Um, Coping is very personal, so it's very subjective, and you need to know what works for you. But when you have certain symptoms, so let's look at it like from the point of your mood. So when, yeah, someone is having very sad moments, a brief episode of sadness, some crying spells, this person will need to do some physical activity. So you would notice like a walk in the night or in the evening, sorry, when the sun goes down, or have some walks in the parks where there's a lot of fresh air. For those who don't fear water, it would be helpful to sit at the beach and listen to the wave sound, because that is like a white noise. It really helps to calm the mind down, and then help you to kickstart your day, basically. So someone who might be having a more of an anxiety type of like symptoms, they will need to be able to slow down. So slow breathing, yoga, meditation, praying, being able to write your thoughts. So journaling, journaling is one of the good things to be able to track how your mental health is doing. So you're able to see that maybe on Mondays you are very more likely to be stressed because of the meetings, and maybe you have some anxiety about certain presentations that are happening. The rest of the week you seem to be coping well. So when you have such a inventory of what happens, it's easier to know what kind of intervention will be helpful for you. um, so maybe bringing it down to high schools and universities, peer groups and clubs work. So being part of certain groups and being part of certain clubs, it helps to boost someone's self-esteem and also feel the sense of belongingness, which also helps to fight the isolation and the thought of being alone and not being worthy of anything in this world. So having that sort of association and being part of things help you to know what happens. We also have simple exercises that we do. So sometimes when you feel very overwhelmed, either before an exam, before an interview, or before making some major decisions, and then they need your answer on the spot, it's good to have like just a breathing exercise. Just have a deep breathing in and out. Put yourself in the now moment. A lot of anxiety thoughts happen because you anticipate certain events that necessarily did not happen. So you need to put yourself in the now. So you breathe in and out gently, and then you ask yourself, where am I in this space? And you are here, and what can you do? And I think I mentioned in the earlier submission, there are things you can do and there are things you can't do. The things you can't do, don't try to attempt them, because nothing good is going to come out from there. And then, so these are personal things anyone can do. Obviously, when the basic first aid is not being helpful, it's good to seek professional help, either from psychologists, from psychotherapists. You can, for those who are in schools, if you do have a psychology unit, it will be helpful. I'm not mentioning some of the counseling units because this applies to a lot of secondary schools, and the school I went to was similar, where we had a school counselor who was a teacher in the school, and that counselor was very strict as a teacher. So a lot of students did not feel very safe to go there and be able to discuss issues, especially as girls. So yes, that's a danger sometimes of having puts roles in such a position. But then once you can identify a trusted person within your space, being it a teacher leader, being it a counselor, if you do have a very trusted person, yes, it's okay to seek help, and then they see how best they can navigate these challenges you're going through, and then refer you appropriately to the right person. In terms of supporting others, so as students, as people, as individuals, it's good to be each other's keeper. So you have to be a good bystander, not the bystander that allows things to just go through and you don't try to pay attention, because this is very peculiar, especially when it comes to bullying. When you see people going through something you're not comfortable or something you wouldn't have wished to have gone through, it's okay to put your feet on the ground and say, this is not okay. It ends today and it ends now. We don't have to continue to do this culture. We don't have to do these rituals anymore. So it ends now, because the person you are doing this is going to be hurt. And we don't know what the other person is going to the kind of imprint, the traumatic imprints that person is going to have for the rest of his or her life. So we need to be each other's keeper. You want to be sensitive to someone's problem. Don't minimize it and saying that, oh, even our time we had this and you don't have this, so you shouldn't be feeling the way you do. Also, and you need to do a lot of reading when it comes to mental health. So a lot of credible resources are out there for the youth, so you can look at youth and mental health, the kind of things that will be peculiar to you and of interest to you. You can read them out, you can share the knowledge. So same way you would, see an information on TikTok and Instagram and you wish to share with a friend. Yeah, so similar, that should be part of your plan. Check in to do some mental health reading just to understand yourself better and maybe being able to offer support to other people. So you have to validate people's feelings. You don't always have to be trying to give an advice or trying to solve everyone's problem. Just trying to be there for the person. Just saying that I'm here for you. I hear you. I see you. Anytime you want, I can give you a hug. You don't have to say anything. So I'm okay. And so I think I'm not sure if I have exhausted all, but then what I wanted to say, I think, was in terms of mental health for youth and mental health for young adults. There's a slight difference because of the kind of developmental stages you find yourself. We also Science also makes us understand that our brains are not fully developed by the age of 25. So before age 25, we are allowed to make all the mistakes we can. But after 25 years, we are expected to be more responsible and more intentional about some of the decisions and actions we make. So definitely the things that are going to affect us before that age will be different from people who are dealing with day-to-day activities. So it's very important to understand that it's okay to be not okay at some point in time, and it does not mean that you are weak. It does not mean that there's something wrong with you. It does not mean you are a failure. It just simply means that whatever situation you were in is slightly bigger than you are, and then you just need someone to hold your hand, walk you through, and guide you on the process of how you went. So this can apply. You can just think about many analogies in your life where you needed help from someone and you reached out. It could be maybe you left your eraser in the house, or you left a book at home and you asked for someone. So the earlier and the more we have conversations surrounding mental health, the easier it's going to become for people to open up, to let them know that I am not okay. And then this will definitely help us to create the gaps that we have in understanding mental health and also being able to deliver mental health intervention for the youth, especially. So in your small corners, you can make your peer reviews, you can make clubs, come up with catchy things, make up action plans. So this year we are moving away from a lot of talk into action. So we've heard a lot about mental health. There's a lot of things. I think the younger generation, the Gen Zs, would tell you a lot of mental health issues. They'll tell you, oh, this will traumatize me. I was traumatized here and then. So you'd usually hear some of the mental health jargons from time to time. But then what steps are we taking to be able to freely open up and talk about mental health conversations? So this is what each one of you who is present here for this conversation should be able to have it as a take-home message. What can I do in my small corner to be able to help to bridge the gaps in mental health interventions for people? When it comes to Ghana, we don't have enough opportunities to talk about it because we have a very high expectations of religion and faith. So sometimes it begins to overshadow uh, the reality on the ground when it comes to mental health condition. But it's not too late to be able to still talk about it. Now, a lot of faith leaders are involving professionals to be able to talk about mental health conditions. So platforms like this, like when Anayao has invited me to, is also an opportunity for us to be able to delve into details about what mental health is, to be able to help you understand the misconceptions from things that we also even watch online and we don't try to process it in the right way. So these are some of the barriers, I think. And the other thing is that we don't have a lot of professionals on the ground. So that is also another challenge. But there is help out there. Once you're able to search for the right information, it will be able to give you the right information. So all psychologists in Ghana are under Ghana Psychology Council. So if there's any information or any specialty you're looking for within the psychology, you can reach out to the council and then they can give you a list of professionals who are licensed in Ghana to be able to give you a breakdown of people who do that. And this is similar to other countries. So that's similar to UK and US. We have boards and we have associations where you can easily search out for the person's specialty, and then it will give you by area or by country or by specialty of who you can reach out to. And this goes back to the same people in the university, your counseling units, your psychology units. Make use of them to be able to talk about issues that bothers you. I don't know if I still have some time, but then what I just want to say is that mental health is really big, and mental health is part of our daily life. However, it is your choice to decide to struggle with it, or is your choice to overcome it. So let today be a day to remind yourself that seeking help is not weakness. Um, Being vulnerable at the point in time is no weakness, but then it is wisdom, and the healing takes strength. So people who come to therapy, it's taking them a lot of strength to be able to do that. So these people are often more resilient than people who shy away from therapy and seeking help and having conversations around it. So yes, I think if I haven't left out anything, this is what I would end here with. But then what I have here is that I put down some statistics that were very alarming. So this was a report that was done in Ghana, because I'm in Ghana, so I can speak for Ghana. So in the high school, senior high schools, about 1 out of 5 people reported suicidal thoughts, and over 22% actually attempted suicide. So what is trying to let us know that these figures are very alarming for a small population like Ghana. So suicide in adolescents is not often talked a lot because, as I mentioned, a lot of people don't even understand that children or younger people can have mental health condition. How much more having the thoughts about suicide and the plans. So having these figures, what it will mean for us in going forward is that any one of us could be predisposed to having thoughts that may not necessarily be good, but thoughts does not equate to actions, and our actions begins now. We know what mental health is. We know what to do when we see someone struggling, and then we can be each other's keeper. And by doing that, we are creating and closing the gap in reaching out to people who have never heard of what mental health condition is. And that creates safer space in our schools. It creates safer spaces in our universities, and eventually these same people are going to the workplaces. So when you've been able to pass successfully through these stages, you are moving into the adult world who are sensitive to mental health needs, which makes work more productive, because we lose about 8% of our GDP to mental health issues. So you can imagine the intensity and the weight of carrying mental health condition into your workplaces. And then these same people are returning back home. So mental health from work carried home, children are being affected, families are being affected, and they are being sent back into the communities. So the cycle never ends. However, with today's conversation, what we want to do is to be able to close that gap, to close that cycle, and then be able to have more healthy conversations around mental health. Thank you so much, and hopefully I've been able to address all the points that you have raised. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marsha. That was a very insightful session. I took lots of notes. I definitely
Right?
hope that, yeah, the guests on the call also did take some notes. At this point, we're gonna just open it up for questions because Marsha has to get back to work by the next hour. Thank you so much for taking time off your busy schedule. I would go first, guys. If you have any
Right.
question, you can just put up your hand, and then Marsha would to take you. Okay, Mustafa, I can see your hand. Let me just ask mine first, and then Mustafa, you can go, right?
I can see you have.
Okay, so
Yeah.
when you talked about the section where we have to uh try to cope with mental health episodes by joining communities so we can feel seen,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
There is a situation where sometimes somebody is already part of a strong social circle, but they're still going through a mental health episode. So where do you think the gap is, and what should these communities be doing differently? Because case in point, Godfred was an active member of a debate circuit and he was winning competitions, yet there was that gap that let him down.
Yeah, it's very subjective, Nanael. So I can think of few things, but that necessarily may not apply here. So that's why you need to have that individualized one-on-one conversation with the people to know what is really happening. So I can think of few things: family dynamics, the kind of upbringing people had, the kind of family environment they are in, the kind of maybe even schools they attended and what they knew, the kind of faith they have. Also, I mentioned that some people are born with the genes for mental health, but they haven't been triggered. So maybe joining that community, having that sort of participation and all could have triggered some of those things. So it's actually an interplay of biopsychosocial, and you need to look at it for individual basis. But these are a few things that I could think about what happens. So if you want to have a society that cares about people, you need to be able to open up. So the leaders should be able to set examples that today I was not feeling well, and when I came in, Kofi waved at me and say hi, and it felt much better. What is there anything that works for you? So you kind of throw it into your community, your club, representatives or members, and then maybe people are able to have some open up. So at work we do have some debriefing sessions. So sometimes the day could be very overwhelming with cases, with people's problems and all that. So we can sit as a group of people, just chat naturally or in a very relaxed manner. It stresses because it makes you feel that, oh, I was actually not the only one struggling with my client today, and I have a colleague who was looking, oh, I was how do I say, I was eyeing the person to be maybe higher than me and she was struggling. So it gives me some comfort. Oh, so I'm not the only one going through that. Okay, sounds good. So being part of a society goes beyond just being part of something. So the person can be functioning, performing, but then what is happening at the background? That is what you may not have or you may not be privy to that information if you don't have an environment that encourages people to speak up.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I think that gives the nuance.
Okay.
Right. Right. Thanks. Mustafa, you had a question. Would you want to unmute and ask, or you would want to type that out?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So continue from where Nanayao ended on his question, right? We all agree that we have different experiences when it comes to certain things. So, for example, we are in the same class, learning the same course, but a friend understands and I don't, or I understand and the friend doesn't. In this case, when the person comes to me with a problem, I am not able to relate with whatever the person is saying, but I am the one who the person is mostly or like very free with. And you also said that we should not always be quick to give advice. In that situation where um I don't really feel or I understand what the person is going through, the most logical thing to me is to kind of to like what we say, show the person the way to also understand it like how I understand it. I don't know if this is making sense.
It does. So I'll look at it from this side. um, Sometimes you can lead with Socratic questioning. Okay, so you can ask, I have been doing my learning in style A. What can be helpful for you? If it's something I can do, I'll help you out. If it's not, is it okay? We can ask someone who might be much better in style B than me. So you kind of throw it back to them so that they are in charge of their decision making, because you really can't force someone to be doing things the way you do. And as you have also mentioned and identified, that it's not everyone who can do things the way you do. So instead of rushing to give an advice, you throw it back in the Socratic way. What could be helpful? What can you do? Can you think of what you can do in your small way? So maybe the person's style, maybe part of it may be something that you already do but in a different way, and then you're like, oh, so this is actually the same thing we are talking about. I don't know, Mustafa, if I've answered part of your question.
Yes, makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. So it's the same. So you don't have to always rush to be someone's helper. You can actually guide them to be able to have that sort of retrospection or inner reflection, and then they're actually able to tell you, oh, I was actually thinking of maybe seeing maybe another colleague for that, and like, oh, perfect, I can actually go with you if you want to. That's okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Mustafa, thank you for your question. Yeah, that's something that also crossed my mind because it's something that worries sometimes. Anybody else has any question? I'll just ask one more question and then I guess we can wrap this up.
Okay.
In international communities, right, where you are dealing with people from diverse backgrounds, you have some
Mm-hmm.
Nigerians, you have Asians, and you just
Yeah.
don't know what their lived experiences might be. So sometimes you have to be very measured in how you relate with them. Your jokes, the way you communicate things, because you don't want to offend people. Does that
Yeah.
restrict our expression? If that restricts our expression, then does that mean we are not fully integrating into the community? And does that mean there could be a chance where some members of the community would be feeling isolated because of the structure of the community, and then eventually they would be stuck with their problems?
Yes, the answer is yes to all. Uh, as humans, we may always be a little bit ignorant of other people's feelings. So, yes, at a point in time, you may step on someone's nationality, you may step on someone's religion, you may step on someone's ethnicity, someone's gender, because, So, the best thing to do is when you want to have a community that has diverse denominations or ethnicity or race, is to have it an inclusive. So you throw it out, and so maybe if it's happening in Ghana, you have people coming from Asia, coming from other. So there's even a difference between other West African countries. So francophone countries in West Africa would have different things from anglophone countries, and this applies to even Eastern Africa and up. So when you have such a thing, you want to have an inclusive thing. You always have to ask what works for you. So in Ghana, when I call you your head, it means this or it means that. How does your culture see this? Do you have anything in your culture that is? So you need to be culturally sensitive. So in our in our setting, like in a clinical setting, we call this trauma-informed care. So with the fact that it is happening in a hospital, it does not mean that the other person understands what's happening. So we might be using terms and all that because they're in the hospital. We may assume that they understand, but the person has no idea what is happening, and they may even find some of the procedures very offensive. So this is similar application in any group that you might be leading, international groups especially. You need to be very considerate. So for example, in Ghana, if we don't talk about other genders, you can't assume if we have people from countries that acknowledge other genders, we are not going to say you are either male or female, or we assume. That is why it would be rude to assume someone's gender because of this. So I know in countries outside, they're a little bit more open to this kind of disclaimers where they are trying to be very inclusive. This may not be very much applicable here in Ghana because we don't have it. But once we start having those things, we have to be opening up our mind that we might be stepping on people's toes. And then if we want to be very intentional community, then we have to be making use of the empathy that I spoke. If you don't have empathy, you can't be very inclusive in your dealings. So yes, the answer is yes, Nanaya. You always step up on someone's toes. You may always make someone feel left out. But what to separate you from others is that you show care, you show up and ask the person, how are you feeling? Is there anything we do that makes it strange for you? Is there anything in your society that you don't do or you do? Can we include it in ours? Yes or no? So it's always about collaboration, give and taking.
Okay, okay. Thank you for
Yeah,
that answer. Yes, it really spells out exactly what we need to do.
yeah.
That's all from me. And
Hmm.
if there are no other questions from our attendants today, then I guess that will be all for this session. Thank you so much, Marsha, for being on this and sharing your professional insights with us. This session is going to be uploaded to the Vacationspars and Cape Coast Open channel, and I'll definitely send you a link.
Yes,
Right.
I'm eager to see that.
Definitely. Okay. All right then. Say hi to everybody at Collabo for us.
I will definitely do that. So take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.